Back, everybody. Another episode of Early Childhood Chats. Andy Roszak with you as always. And today, joined by Patrick Patterson of South Carolina, now in North Carolina. but He's the president of Global Partners for Fathers and Families Consulting. And Patrick has, gosh, impressive resume here, sir. Bachelor of Social Work degree from Benedict College and dual master's degree in social work and public health in University of South Carolina. Been married to his high school sweetheart since 1997 and two beautiful daughters who you've actually used to be co-authors in the children's books I Love When Daddy Reads to Me and Unplugged: A Day of Family Fun Without Devices. Both books are available at Barnes & Noble's, Amazon, and Books A Million websites. Patrick, thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited to talk with you.
Thank you, Andy. I appreciate you. Thank you to your listeners.
Well, wonderful. Well, this is really exciting because, not often do I get to talk to somebody who is in early childhood, but on top of it, someone else who shares a passion for public health like myself.
Yeah.
So I worked in public health for many years and just exciting times. And I see so many public health principles kind of being applicable to what we're doing, obviously, in early childhood. And thinking about some of the engagement that we're going to talk about today with our families and certainly with our fathers. So I guess if you would, Patrick, give the folks a little bit of sense of kind of who you are, what your background is, and why you're doing the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you again. I got to shout out this thing here on my couch, the Bears. Hi to all of our, we'll be winning the championship this year, guys. So stay tuned. Native of Columbia, South Carolina, born and raised. As you mentioned in my introduction, I went to Benedict College. Which is the HBCU. I went to USC, the University of South Carolina, for graduate school. Big dreams to do sports as a kid. I played all the sports and was fairly decent, but was a poor student. Middle school was middle school. High school, my parents were together when I was a kid, and at the age of 15, they separated. And so how I got to working with fathers is a very personal story, but I was a pretty strong academic kid up to about 10th grade. And when they separated, my mind did the same thing. Athletically was still focused, but after practice, after games, the issues that I had at home were back. And so one of the things I learned in the years after doing the work that I've been doing for 25 years is that my father was and still is my greatest inspiration. He's a man that worked 3 jobs. He's a man that taught me how to shoot a jump shot, how to run, how to box. All those things that you get from a dad were what my dad gave me. But how I got into the work was when my parents separated, my dad he was formerly an alcoholic, a user. He returned to that. He relapsed. And so for my last 2 years of high school, imagine going to practice or going to a game or being at a game and there's a disturbance and the person while you're playing is your father. That was my story. But I got to say, and I'll stop here, from birth to that point, the foundations of who I am today came from both my parents. And my dad was very instrumental in that. So when I say he's my hero, we can get into it, but years later, I look back at I've been lots of places and a lot of things that he taught me in those first 15 years were still part of me getting to where I am. And so that's my passion. I knew at the end of probably my senior year of high school that my dad was not going to return to who I grew up with. But he was also a guy, and I say this about all the fathers I work with, is most guys don't know that they have secret superpowers. He knew he was okay, but nobody ever told him that he was amazing. And so my dream, my passion in life, whether it's a person I know or a person that I just met or a guy I've known for some time, is to bring life. And so particularly with males, one of my things I like to do is to just appreciate them, applaud them, encourage them. I've needed it throughout my years. And my dad, if he had heard somebody say that you're amazing, I think it could have been different.
Well, it's certainly a good point to bring up. And
Yeah,
look, I'm a father. I got a 3-year-old and a 7-month-old, both little girls. That's pretty similar to you with the little
yeah,
daughters. And being a dad is special.
yeah,
Being the father to two beautiful young girls is pretty special too, isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah,
And you start to think about just some of the social, I don't know, social constructs, social supports, whatever the right word is. But look, I was a firefighter for 10 years.
yeah,
There was things that you didn't do because it wasn't manly, right?
yeah,
And I feel like in many cases that even the idea of just telling somebody, hey, you're great or you're appreciated or you're awesome.
yeah,
I mean, you think about especially our father's generation.
yeah.
That wasn't something we did, was it?
Not normal. It was toughen up. It was be strong. It was all the things that made you suppress how you really felt. But I think it was many opportunities that could have happened for him. Not in the way that we do it today with counseling and therapy, but it was recognition. It was appreciation. My dad worked 3 jobs most of my childhood, and it was a continual motion. I remember him coming home, taking a cat nap, and going out to work. And my mother is an angel, but I don't know if she even knew how to feed him, not food, but encourage him. So um, I just know that when I got older and through my life's experiences, getting to do the work that I do as a social worker, I recognized what was missing, and it was not physical,
Yeah.
it's emotional. So as a dad, my kids are 18 and 16. There are days where for all the parents, it's tough, but particularly for guys who are, in my words, socialized to internalize, meaning hold it in. So when I'm in a room with guys and I'm doing a training and I'm doing a session with some fathers, I'm very intentional about what I say. I'm also very intentional about listening to guys because most will respond to, if you ask how you doing, it's a status response. I'm good or I'm fine. And my belief system is that's the invisible. I don't want to you don't want to hear how I'm doing. You know what I mean? So super important.
Well, and I kind of think about just your father working the 3 jobs and obviously doing that to support, your family. And you see this happen quite often. You still see it happen today. I mean, there's that fine line of being there and supporting the family and doing all you can versus some of the hardship that causes. Because look, if you're working 3 jobs, that means you're not around as much, right? And you
Yeah.
don't have that quality time. And heaven forbid, when you get home, you're just exhausted. And the last thing you need is a 7-month-old that's getting up every few hours. I mean, it's really, really tough to balance all those. Do you find that many kind of new dads are ill-equipped to kind of make that transit? I know you talk a lot about fatherhood 101, what is it,
Yeah.
how to start and all that.
Yeah.
I mean, even just as simple as, hey, your newborn's going to get up every 2 or 3 hours. So
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
prepared
Yeah.
for that, man.
I think it's a great question actually, because I think about the way that I was raised. I'm the third of four. I've got a 6-year older sister, a 4-year older brother, and a 4-year younger brother. So it's one girl and 3 boys. When I got home from school, my brothers and I, we changed our clothes. You know what we went to do?
Go play
Went outside.
outside, I'm guessing,
We went
right?
outside to play.
Yeah, right.
My sister, on the other hand, this is not an indictment on my mom because this is how my family raised us and lots of other families. But my sister did not go outside to play. She helped my mother prepare supper. And when we came in, my sister would yell. We'd come in the house, we eat. We finished eating. The same 3 guys that just came from outside, we went back outside. And my sister helped clean with my mom. I'll say this other point. My sister had dolls throughout her childhood. And so she learned how to, feed just a doll baby. But I've I've been in enough rooms with guys who have had none of that. I'm gonna call it life skill experience. My mother ironed my dad's uniforms. Until I got older, she ironed our school clothes. Um, when I got married in 1997, my wife was like, "You get out the bed last." I'm like, "Yeah, I know." but it's you make the bed then. There's so many guys, and that's no knock on anybody, but so many guys who have had little exposure to what parenting is or fatherhood outside of what we saw. And for some guys, they've never seen it. You know what I mean? So it's a difficult thing to assume the position that you've never seen. You know, as a firefighter, I'm sure you had training.
Right.
A lot of guys have had no training. And so when you think about the two words adequate and inadequate, what I've learned is when guys feel adequate at something, you know it. Like all the grill masters that I know, you know it. Because they feel adequate. But when they feel inadequate, it's not as loud. So like I've seen guys who say, I don't touch babies
Yeah.
because they feel inadequate. There's no training along the way. So part of the deal, I think, is just encouraging guys and giving them the opportunity to practice some of these things. But in my role, I mean, I saw a good guy early, but later in my years, when I started dating my wife, I didn't know I should have washed both of our cars. I thought I just washed my car. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's a huge opportunity when I think about what you're doing with this platform, but also what I'm hoping to do when I'm talking to fathers and practitioners.
So what is kind of the secret sauce here? How do we entice fathers to kind of get more involved, knowing that involvement can be a wide variety of things, but I
Yeah.
don't think there's any debate any longer. The research, the study, even just our own guts tell us, look, kids are going to do better when all the parents are involved, not just one, right? So
Yeah.
what's kind of the secret sauce here? How do we pull some of these fathers in that are maybe a little hesitant, maybe a little inadequate feeling, maybe just a little distant? What,
Yeah.
what have you tried that's kind of worked to re-energize them and refocus them?
Well, I think it's I'll speak from two perspectives. I'll speak to you and me, just as regular people. And then if there are audience members who are practitioners, I'll try to cover both in the same conversation. I've learned there are 3 A's that are really important for men. And I've been in prisons, I've been in the NFL locker rooms, I've done stuff with the NBA, I've done stuff with Head Start, Healthy Start. I've seen all kinds of fathers. I've fathers internationally. Um, and here are some basic things that I've learned. The first A that I find to be important is acknowledgement. And when I say that, I mean when you see a guy who is doing his best, is to acknowledge it. It might not be what you want him to do, but acknowledge it. And I'll give you an example. I do groups, and if I got a guy who's been late 3 times in a row, but this day he's early, you can't ignore that. You got to acknowledge it. You got a guy who says, I don't touch babies. His wife or girlfriend leaves and the baby is wet and he changes the diaper. Might not be the way that she would. You acknowledge it. It's part of our DNA for all of us, but particularly for males, acknowledgement is really important. The second A is appreciation. So acknowledgement is one thing to, identify something that's been done, but appreciation. So I've heard, as a Southerner, I've been around people long enough to know, I've heard people say, I'm not going to appreciate a man for what he should be doing, as in taking care of his family or putting gas in the car. But I will tell you, Andy, I make a mean lasagna. I mean, I'm not bragging. So let me just be clear. I'm not bragging. I'm not bragging. All right. But when I make it, and I've been married 27 years, my wife expresses appreciation because I do a pan. That means after we eat it that day, we're going to have leftovers, right? So it's got value, but she will get on the phone. My kids will say how much they love it's a whole dose of appreciation. What I've learned is men do more of what's appreciated. So that's, to me, is really important. The last A that I think people they struggle with a little bit, but I think it's one of the most. It's applaud.
Mm.
Um, and a lot of guys have been reamed out or they've been criticized publicly, but not always applauded publicly. So those three A's to me are really important. So even if, and I do this, but I'm in the airport. If I see a guy, it just happened to us recently. I was in the airport. My wife and I were traveling. There was a guy in front of me. He had 2 babies. He was by himself. And I watched him from the time we got to the airport to the time we got on. He sat right in front of us. And when we landed, both kids were asleep. And I took a note. I found a note for my wife. And I just said, on the paper, I said, "You're an amazing father." And when it was time to get out of here, around the seat, and he looked back and he did one of these over the seat pounds. I just want to acknowledge that I saw you, So those three A's to me, you can use them at home, you can use them at work. But when I work with guys, I try to be conscious of incorporating those three A's when I'm working with dads.
I love that. I love the real life stories too. And you start to think about if you're a early childhood educator, whether you're,
Yeah.
religious based, family based, Head Start based, whatever you're doing, if you're in early childhood at all, boy, there's just some real simple things that you could be incorporated into your program when you do see that dad at pick up or drop off or, throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah. I also heard along the way, and this is I could forget a lot of things, but some things stick. I heard this adage that said the sweetest sound that a person can hear is the sound of their name.
Mm.
And for guys, particularly fathers, young, old, again, I've done this stuff internationally. Respect. If I ask a question, rank order these things that you want, respect, love, home, universally, they pick respect. And then we always break down, how does that look? And it's handshakes. Sometimes it's depending on the culture. Sometimes it's eye contact, but universally, men love to hear, "Good morning, Andy," or "Good morning, Mr. Patterson." When they feel respected, they typically, not all cases, return that. I've been in some chaotic situations in prisons, and I've been able to manage the conflict by establishing respect. "I want to hear you out, sir. I want to hear you out. Can we just talk about it?" When they feel respected, the conversation shifts. When they feel disrespected, I promise you, you're going to have an experience. So that's important, but respect.
I don't know how many people even know it, but on my days off from the fire department,
Yeah.
uh, I worked for the Illinois Department of Corrections, and my
Oh,
job
man.
was to go out and put ankle bracelets on folks that had been recently released from jail. And I was unarmed. I was just a contractor, but there I was. And this is back in the early 2000s. So cell phones weren't really reliable as they are today.
Yeah.
Certainly the signal wasn't. And I got to tell you, Patrick, going into somebody's home and not having really you know, any kind of traditional way to defend
Actually,
yourself other than
yeah.
kind of the verbal judo and just making people like you. I appreciate that because that was definitely something like, I don't care if it's the worst place I've ever been. Like, I'm treating this place like it's the Taj Mahal. I'm
Yeah.
respecting what you have. I'm
Yeah.
respecting who you are. And there's no judgment here.
Yeah.
Um, and I got to tell you, it was, certainly not the easiest job, but in all those years I did it, I only had one encounter, and it was kind of scary. A guy came at me with an axe, But other than that, Patrick, it was a pretty good job. Um, but it was all about kind of setting that tone and kind of, as you had mentioned, like, I see you, I acknowledge you, I respect you, and we're going to have a conversation here, and we're going to have some mutual respect. And
Yeah.
I really do think that went a long way. I saw a lot of my kind of colleagues would come in a little bit more heavy handed and just, I'm the authority and I'm this and I'm like, dude, I'm nobody. I'm just here to put this ankle
Yeah.
bracelet on. That's it.
Yeah.
And I hope we work together and you get this thing off, because
Yeah.
it is what it is. But yeah, it was a really interesting job. But I always had that
Where'd you
mentality that
get,
you're talking
where'd
about.
you get what taught you to do that?
it was one of those things where a friend of a friend had kind of said, "Hey, I'm making some decent money doing this on the side." I'm like, as a fireman, you're only working 24 on, 48 off, so it was
Yeah,
only 8 or 9 days a month. So
yeah,
and I quite honestly, a lot of the guys would do construction and do roofs, and look, I'm a fat kid. I don't want to get up on a roof or anything. That's 100 degrees up on the roof wasn't exciting for me. So
yeah,
I kind of fell into that, and I did it for many, many years. Um, but you think about that shift from incarceration and kind of that lifestyle change of almost being told what to do and having a real stable environment and having a real routine, all of which, by the way, kids like. They like
yeah,
stability, they like routine.
yeah,
Um, and then kind of going out to being released and going out to kind of your new normal. And it was scary for a lot of people. I had many people tell me, I don't like it out here. I'd rather go back in.
yeah,
And that was a real interesting conversation. And I'm not by any means a social worker, but
yeah,
I did my best to kind of understand, like, why did you feel that way and what could we maybe do about it to get you back into, in a positive trajectory? Because look, your family needs you, right? I mean, that was
yeah,
kind of the bottom line. Let's do this. Not if you're feeling bad, let's think about your family and kind of bring it back that way.
yeah, yeah.
I wish
No.
I knew you back then. I would have called you for some advice.
Well, it sounds like you figured it out because you talk about secret sauce, and I always think about this topic of working with fathers is a very personal topic. Um, I've met titled people who are hurt people, um, and they've got the position, but not the passion to work with fathers. And it's not tied to any dislike, it's tied to their own childhood. Um, and one of the things, I was just on the phone earlier with a group in Florida, and they were talking about the challenges of actually keeping staff
Mm.
in a fatherhood program. And I asked a bunch of questions, and I don't have any preconceived notions, but I was trying to figure out what could be the issue. And to me, the step that most people who work with fathers bring is their either lived love for their father or their disdain. But I haven't met anybody who's kind of gray. In this case, most of the people that they hired were people who were struggling with their own fatherhood story. And it's kind of hard to, push something that you don't care for. I always say this: I don't like tomatoes. And it's not an indictment on tomatoes. If you're listening, I'm
But
sorry.
what about the lasagna though? How do you
I
not?
sauces I can do, but in terms of an apple-like figure, I can't. Like in a salad, and if I taste that, I think it's a texture issue actually. But
Okay.
it's another conversation. But my point was, I would not be a good tomato salesperson because I don't like them. So I translate this to fatherhood. If you have an issue with your father or your child's father, and this is both male and female, it's going to be hard to make the connection. And so I believe good programs, when they hire people to work with fathers, they ask and they do an assessment of somebody's story. And if they say, man, I haven't talked about this in a long time, and they tear up, just be aware. It's not don't hire. I'm not saying don't hire them, but just be aware that this could impact their performance. For me, one of my greatest challenges was when my parents separated. The years that I spent without my father, I grew angry,
Mm.
very.
Yeah.
I would see him where I went to undergraduate and graduate school and high school. They're all within a 4-block radius. So it wasn't like I was in a different town. I saw him as I went through my trajectory, and I was more hurt than mad, actually. But that had to be addressed through counseling. And most people don't like to talk about it, but helpers need healing too. And that's where my life shifted, was when I actually had to acknowledge I'm actually hurt by this. Um, I'm not mad as so much, but I'm actually feel let down because this was my guy. And then to see the strong figure laying in the street or asking for change, or, just not looking like the guy I knew growing up. I was hurt. And if you don't address that thing, it actually projects on other people. And so in this work, males and females, so please hear me say that, if you've not tapped into your own journey, it'll show up. Before you speak, it'll show up. It'll show up.
I kind of want to riff on that. I think that's really interesting. And I guess I'm curious, kind of from your professional standpoint,
Yeah.
how do we learn to be fathers? Is it mostly through observation and kind of our personal experiences of how we were treated as kids? Or is it honestly, I don't know the answer. I'm curious to kind of hear what you think about that.
I think it's a combination of factors, Andy. I think it's seeing your father, if you had that opportunity. Sometimes it's seeing other men who've seen it. I've been in the room with guys who learned from watching Bill Huxtable,
Sure.
Cliff Huxtable, excuse me. I've seen guys who watch Archie Bunker or James Evans from Good Times. I mean, so guys will gravitate to a source that they can lean on that they think relates, but it just depends on where you were raised, how you were raised. I've also seen guys who hold tight to the fact that their mother or their aunts taught them how to be a man. And so for me, I think it's multiple sources. Where I think it becomes clearer is when you find out who you are. And your father, I mean, there's probably things you've learned about yourself since you've had kids that you thought, oh, I didn't. I like sleep, actually. I didn't know I like sleep. So
as long as we're not emulating Al Bundy, I think we're doing
right. There's some characters out there. But some guys don't have any. It's so interesting because I've done groups and I do groups and I'll talk to guys about what they call you've heard the term baby mama.
Yeah, sure.
In our programs, I will say co-parent. And I've had many occasions where I'll say to a guy, like, do you want to call her something? Nothing. Like, what else can I call her? I'm like, well, you can call her your co-parent. It's like, I never thought about that. And it sounds crazy to some, but some of the things that people think are common knowledge are not common knowledge. And people, with the stereotype,
yeah,
that men don't ask questions, but a lot of guys go without asking because of the way we're perceived. So it's a great question, but it's not an easy answer.
No, I didn't think it would be. That's why I wanted you to answer it.
Yeah.
The other thing I know that you're really mindful about in the trainings that you do and the work that you do is to really make sure that we're engaging the fathers.
Yeah.
And, I know you even talk about during home visits and this type of stuff. Uh, I don't know that people are purposefully excluded more so than just, I mean, look, especially in early childhood, we have a 95% female workforce. And
Mhm.
maybe it's, and look, moms are breastfeeding. There's a whole bunch of other things, right? Um, so I don't know that it's a purposeful exclusion, but it may just be, look, men are comfortable talking to men, especially about kind of intimate things. And I don't know what the root cause is, but I know sometimes it does happen. Obviously, you got a whole course that you talk about it.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you're thinking about? Like, how do we include those fathers? And I'm thinking kind of more broadly too about,
Mhm.
I don't know what the latest data is, but it used to be about half of marriages end in divorce.
Yeah.
So now you've got, step parents and boyfriends and like all this weird stuff that starts coming into play.
Yeah.
And you had it in your life, I've had it in my life. So we've kind of lived through it, and
Yeah.
it wasn't always the cleanest. It got kind of messy at times, right? So
Yeah.
what advice do you have to those working with fathers of kind of how do you make sure that we purposely include them? How do we deal with kind of the halves and the steps and the boyfriends? What does that process look like?
Yeah, I think the greatest tool that your listeners have and that you have and I have is who we are. Um, I believe that learning your father's story leads to the word forgiveness, and healing. And that's what changed my life. Um, I told you there was a stretch that I was angry and it didn't appear. If you met a colleague that has known me since I left college, they would disagree because on the surface, I was smiling. But on the inside, Father's Day, my dad's birthday is January 1st. Every year, it's a celebration. It wasn't for me. The holidays were tough for me. I think part of the first step for professionals is to really understand where they are. And I had to acknowledge where I was, but through therapy, counseling, but also hearing my father's story. What I didn't say earlier, at the time that my parents separated, my dad had been a user before I was born. For 15 years solid, my dad didn't use. So I didn't know the guy who my older siblings knew. I didn't know that guy. I knew a guy who was here every day and took me to practice. But then when my grandfather died, when my parents separated, my father didn't have an outlet. Mm. I'm not making excuses, but he figured out I could get rid of this pain with this bottle, right? Or this needle, or this joint. And so I think, and I'm answering your question, but it's very important that staff understand their own father's stories. My forgiveness came when I heard my dad tell me that he was molested, which that would have, my dad was old school. That wasn't going to be a fishing conversation.
Yeah, right.
I didn't know that he was severely abused by the way my grandfather, I'm gonna use the word, spanked him. My dad was a dark-skinned young man. And if you know anything about kids, they can be cruel. But all of the stuff that was traumatic for him, he just digested. And when my grandfather died, it was a chance to bring it up. It just came up in unhealthy way. So first thing about engaging, I think, is to self-assess. Am I good in this conversation? Because I've seen people make jokes. I was in Texas and this lady said to me, I have 4 children and one of them is my husband. So you've heard the term implicit bias.
Yep.
You got to believe me when I tell you this. When this father walks into that room with this lady, and I don't know, I'm not making light of this, he's probably going to get some of that, the way she thinks about her husband, right? I've had to call from the school with my 2 daughters. My oldest, who's 18, when she started her menstrual cycle, the school called my phone and asked for my wife. And they repeatedly asked, can we speak to Peyton's mom? And I said, well, I'm her dad, can I help? But there was this assumption that I wouldn't know what to do, right? Now, I've never had a menstrual cycle, but my wife and I've talked about if this call comes. So I think it's awareness is the big point. And then the second thing is skill development. I believe that competence builds confidence. So you have to train people. Like I role play in my sessions. We do vignettes, we do scenarios, but I think it's awareness and then training are the 2 things I think most agencies assume people have because they have degrees. But I'm just telling you that personal piece, you never see on a resume. And it can end your program. If somebody's unhinged, it could end your program. So those 2 pieces are important.
Working with the Fatherhood Clearinghouse, National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse for President W. Bush and President Barack Obama, you were kind of running the show there. You were serving the manager, correct? Must have been quite the honor. And I can only imagine some of the conversations and some of the data that you were looking at during that time. And you want to talk a little bit about that national clearinghouse that you were involved in?
Yeah, I'll mention 2 things about it. One is I've been managing it now, and I still currently manage it under President Biden. A lot of people who struggle with this issue. As I said before we came on air, I've been to 48 states and 9 countries. And I've seen a lot of people and this is all tied to fatherhood. Seen a lot of people that have struggled with this issue. Race does not determine, income does not determine, gender does not determine, your career path does not determine. I've seen some very wealthy professional athletes I've worked with, and money doesn't do anything for this issue. So that was one thing that I've benefited from, but also federally speaking, a lot of folks discount the government because of, you know, lots of factors. What I will say as a contractor with the government is there are states and the federal government, they are doing their very best to kind of match what's on the ground in terms of funding. I will plug this one piece in August. I don't know when this will air, but in August 13th through 15th, if you go to fatherhood.gov, we're hosting a national fatherhood conference, and it's going to be open to the public. The registration charge, if there was a drum roll, I would play it, is free. So anybody who wants to attend, you're going to have the highest level of federal officials there. I'll be there, of course. There are practitioners from across the country, and we're expecting close to 800 folks to come out. But here's why it's important to be there. The federal government is going to be announcing federal funding for fatherhood, and I think it's close to $150 million.
Wow.
It'll be discussed and announced at this conference. So my vantage point since I've been managing the Clearinghouse has been tremendous because it's my life's work. I just happen to do it with the government. And you heard the different administrations. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If you get lost in that, I know this is the season for it, you're lost, but it doesn't matter. Kids of all statuses need their fathers. They need both parents.
Yeah, and that's one thing that, you know, living here in Washington, D.C., there's very few things that it seems like we can all agree on. But as I've said before, and I'll continue to say, the kids
Yeah.
is one of the things that we can all agree on. We all want a
Yeah.
great future for our kids, and that cuts across, gosh, any boundary that you want to put up there, including political divide. So
Yeah.
I'm happy to see that the Clearinghouse has enjoyed bipartisan support and is, you know, still doing great things. I know that you've had a big focus on fundraising and writing grants, and gosh, I don't know what it's at nowadays. Last I checked, it was what, 300 million plus that you've been able to successfully write for. And I mean, that's phenomenal. And you think about, you know, look, like you said, this cuts across everything. Money isn't everything, but money certainly does help. And it
It
certainly
does
does help
help.
raise awareness of these issues and bring people together, serve as a convener, and help target some of this. Where there's money, sometimes there's effort, right?
Mhm.
Um, what would you say? And I'm not asking you to give away everything here, but you
Yeah.
know, what are some good tips? Why aren't people thinking about these funds? Why aren't people writing for funds? What should people be thinking about when it comes to the available funds to engage fathers?
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of programs should be writing for these funds and trying to do some stuff with them.
I'll be doing my very best to encourage people the next several months because it'll be out March, April, but the time to start now. So if I gave 3 tips for folks who might want to apply for funding, one is build a team of people who are invested in this topic. Don't even talk about money, but there are folks in the community that are invested in this topic, and don't look for, or should I say it this way, look beyond the kind of flashing lights. I always encourage folks to think about barbers and hairstylists and food truck owners. And why is that? Because they have foot traffic that you can touch the entire community with these kind of partners. I always say, think about pastors and clergy, you know, who can help you spread your message and interdenominationally. So build a team. The second thing is that's going to be important if you're going to write a grant is the data that provides evidence that there's a problem. And several places you can look for data: census.gov, Kids Count, KIDSCOUNT, the American Community Survey. There are lots of places you can get data, but in any grant you're going to write, you got to be able to articulate not only that this is a problem, but numerically state that this is a problem at this magnitude. And then the last thing I think, and this may be the one that wraps it together, is you got to involve the population that you're working with. So if you're at a table of professionals to work with fathers and you haven't asked dads locally how this would work, you missed it. there's an adage that says those who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution.
Mm.
So you got to think about bringing people to the table. So any program that I've run over the years, we have involved, if it's young people, if it's, young adults, if it's guys who are incarcerated, if it's new fathers, we do no planning without that population to help us think about what makes sense. And so those three pieces I would offer. And then stay tuned. Grants.gov is the federal website, but I would also tell you fatherhood.gov is a place that when these grants are announced, they'll be announced there first.
Wonderful. Well, I'll definitely be encouraging folks to stay tuned for that and
Yeah.
take a look at that. It seems like a wonderful opportunity,
Huge.
quite honestly.
Huge, huge, huge.
Can I shift gears? I want to learn more
Yeah.
about the two children's books that you wrote with your daughters. Can you tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about how that came to be and kind of the messages of you're trying to convey in the books and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah, I think the origin was started in disobedience for me. I was in where you are, I was in DC, and I was actually supporting a friend who was doing a book release. And I was being a friend. We were at a bookstore called Sankofa, near Howard University. And I was standing there. If he said, take this or hold this or do this or take this pic, I just did all that stuff. And throughout the day, my kids were younger. The bookstore owner said, well, where's your book? I said, I work with dads, but I'm not an author. I went through 100 excuses. And at the time we were living in Delaware, I was going home that night. And so she said to me, you're hard-headed, aren't you? I said, I don't know, but books is not my thing. So she said, when you get home, I want you to ask your daughters would they want to write a book with their dad. And she said, if they say yes, you call me. So I got home. I asked my kids who were in the bed. My wife didn't appreciate this that night, but I got them up and they were readers. They were 6 and 8. They're 18 and 16 now. They were readers, and it was immediately excitement that we could do this together. And I thought, oh gosh. So I called the lady back. She said, here's what I want you to do. And she sent me a bunch of things, a rubric to help me write. She said, think about something that you guys care about. In my house as a kid, I didn't read. We didn't read. But my wife and I made that a priority. And so we did. So we picked the topic, and my kids, we picked the topic together. And the lady told me, she said, she's a elderly, I would say, just lovely lady. She said, if you pick a topic that you guys really care about, it'll be easy. And we wrote the book in 2 hours.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
So reading was a topic. It took us a little bit of time to figure out the title, but every page in the book speaks about, this is from my kids' perspective, what they enjoyed about me reading to them. And so there are pages that say things like, we love the fact that we have all of his attention. And there's a picture of me shutting off my cell phone. So it's that piece, but larger scale, what we found in titling the book was to make it a resource for dads. And we never thought about selling it, honestly. I just wanted to actually hold it. But I love when Daddy Reads to Me was just that. And we probably sold 30,000 copies now. And it's not been pushing it. We've not been, it's something we're proud of. But I've always wanted to have something that dads who had little kids could have as a tool. Finished that book. We traveled, we presented together. It was amazing. And the second book was really dedicated, before COVID, was dedicated to our kids asking for cell phones. So it was entitled Unplugged, A Day of Family Fun Without Devices, because we told stories about how we spent our days when they were younger without devices, from playing games to going outside. And it was hoping to encourage parents, young parents. You don't have to get rid of it, but find ways to spend time without them. And at the end of the story, the kids realized that it wasn't such a bad day without the device in their hand. And so it's something from this point on, Andy, that my kids can share down the line with their kids. And so it's been transformative for our family, big time.
No, it's really amazing. And you think about just life without the devices. I mean,
Yeah.
you and I both lived it. It was great,
We're on it
right?
right
I
now.
mean, yeah, man. I mean, it's a burden, right? It's like we love the devices because they allow us to do so many other cool things. But
Yeah.
boy, nothing breaks my heart, Patrick, when I go out to dinner and I look across at that table next to me and I see the mom, the dad, and the two kids all sitting there on those phones or tablets. I mean, it's heartbreaking, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. We went last 2 weeks ago, we were in Florida and we weren't fishing. And we got up at about 5:30. And they weren't happy with me. I like to fish, but we were on a boat from about 6:30 to about 12. And we caught fish. And one thing, I looked around every time my wife and I would catch each other's eye, we look. And our daughters and one of their friends, another female, um, they were not on their phones. I kept saying, I said, look, like, and we had the best. If I said to them, we're going to be together for 6 hours with no phones, with no activity, if I just said we're going to sit here, they would go crazy, right? Just at the thought of it, right?
yeah.
But I think when we find ways to kind of bond and build, time just evaporates. And it was so awesome to me. And we all immediately ran back to check in when we got off the boat, but it's still possible. Until recently, we would have them phones turned in at 8:30 at night. And people thought we were doing something crazy, but I thought, no, 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 no. I need them to go to bed. But also need to know that the devices don't control us. We actually control the devices. So it's one of my greatest lessons. It's just managing time.
I was at a concert last night and this lady next to me, she basically watched the whole concert through her cell phone because she was recording the whole and I was thinking like, gosh, if you could just put the phone down and look not through the screen, but actually look with your eyes, like at the stage, you might enjoy. I mean, I don't know who's going to go home and watch all that footage anyway, but you
Nobody.
know, I mean, it's like when people
Nobody.
record fireworks and stuff, like, what do you do
Yeah.
with that footage?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Nobody.
you know, nobody, right? I mean, I got hours and hours of stuff on my phone I'll never watch. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to see it, quite honestly. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so prepare me a little bit for the future. My oldest is 3.
Yeah.
What age am I going to start getting bugged about, Daddy, I need a cell phone?
I think it gets younger now. My oldest was 5th grade, so about
Wow.
10. But I think it's getting younger now, because it's more accessible, and that was 8 years ago. Time has changed such a way, but if I gave you any word of encouragement, it's just to maintain the acknowledgement that they're not going away. So
Yeah.
to say you can't do it, I don't know if that helps, but I think to say here's the time. We used to drive from Delaware to South Carolina. We would have states that we would not have our phone. When we drove, we'd
Yeah.
say, okay, pick the 2 states,
I
but these
like
are
that. I
states you
like
won't
that.
have your phone in your hand. And without fail, Andy, without fail, they go to sleep, you
Oh.
know. But if they were engaged, stimulated, it's not gonna happen. But we share control. Some people disagree, but I believe in parenting, respect goes both ways. But we gave them options. You pick the 2 states. And we agreed when we hit the Virginia line, hand them over.
Huh.
But it was just to help them understand that this doesn't control you. You actually control it. Now they're older now, so they've got their own kind of independence. But early on, we didn't want them to be, codependent on this to be functional during the day. So
Yeah, and there's some real I haven't read it for a while, but there were some real interesting articles I read a while ago about Steve Jobs, and I don't know if you saw those, but when these iPhones and stuff were first coming out, he wouldn't let his kids have them because he was seeing the research about how people are addicted and how they, like a bicycle just kind of sits there, right? The bicycle doesn't ping you and say, "Come ride me." All your friends
yeah,
are riding me. I need you to. The
yeah,
bicycle is just kind of passive, but these
yeah,
I think looking at those cell phones is almost like the equivalent of a bicycle. That's not true, right? These are
Yeah.
actively involved, actively designed
Yeah.
to engage with you and to continue feeding that, whatever that is in our brain that like, we got to be satisfied. We got to be
Yeah.
satisfied. We got to check it. We got to check,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I know adults struggle with it. So I can't imagine what it must do to the programming of some of the young kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
But aye, aye, aye. Well,
Man,
tell us a little bit about the Global Partners for Fathers and Families. I know you have a whole consulting line.
yeah.
What does that kind of look like? What can people reach out for help with? How do you work with your clients? What services do you offer? All that kind of
Yeah.
good stuff.
Yeah. I would say it's two lanes or lines of business that we do business. One is fathers, men, and boys. So on a given day, you'll see me in a school, in a prison, in a community, working with fathers, men, and boys in some capacity. Just last week, I was up in a small county in North Carolina, and there was a student athlete leadership conference that my company put on, and it was teaching boys about independence, life skills, and the female athletes that came in as well. But it was important for us to talk about some of the basics around discipline, self-control, communication. Um, I'm in prisons a good bit, working with fathers, specifically those who are coming home, about their role as parents. A core of my work with men and boys is around just who they are. I told you about my dad earlier. I want to create a soundtrack in their head that helps them to believe that they can do things. I believe belief translates to behaviors. And so for us, that's the first line of business. So for Head Start programs, for state government, I've got a few contracts in a couple different states where I regularly train social workers, health department workers, change agents, how to best work with fathers. Head Start, same thing. I'm at probably 6 or 7 Head Start conferences a year, training folks on or adding to their toolbox on how to work with men and boys. And so it's a personal passion of mine. The second line of business is around nonprofits. And so there are 4 things that we do with nonprofits. And this has been simultaneous with my fatherhood work. One of those is established nonprofits. We set you up with your 501c3. And so last year we did 51 of those across the country, where a group who has passion, but they're not legal, we help them become a legal entity, which you need to apply for grants. The second thing we do is grant research. So for a lot of organizations, they want to get a grant, but they don't know where to start. And so we help them identify funding opportunities. And it's not just me. Let me just say this again. It's not just me. I've got a team of folks, but that's really important. The third thing we do is grant writing. Last year, we did $7 million worth of grants for clients, and we'll probably exceed that this year. But our clients vary from all over the country. The small organization will ask for $1,000 grant to be completed to those who ask for $4 million or $3 million. So we got a range of capacity. And the fourth piece is board training, board development. A lot of funders are now asking about your boards. And so we're doing that. So it's nonprofit setup, grant research, grant writing, and board development. Mixed into all of that is training. And so probably 10, 11 times a year, I'm either doing it here virtually or I'm physically in a room with nonprofits to train them on how to secure grants, how to secure corporate sponsorships, how do you cultivate donors. I've learned lots of things by failure. And so I've tried my best to be transparent in the fatherhood space, but also in this nonprofit space. But our website is Global Partners FF, as in fathersandfamilies.com, globalpartnersff.com. There's a space on there. If you want us to talk with you about your work with fathers, men, and boys, you can click a link. If you want to talk about your nonprofit or both, actually, Andy, you can find us. But it's a passion. I sometimes wonder how my life started. When I finished high school, I had a 1.3 GPA. And now I have finished undergrad and graduate school. I've traveled throughout the country, and I notice it's ministry. And the source of my ministry outside of my Heavenly Father was my own father. And it's taken me around the world. And I'm just grateful. I'm just grateful to have an opportunity to serve, to give, to connect with you. It's been a blessing. And I can't say it any other way.
Well, I certainly appreciate all the wonderful work you're doing. And boy, I tell you what, you have got a tremendous track record and a lot of accolades, and I can see why.
Yeah.
The passion shines through, and I think that's, so important in today's society of
Yeah.
get into a job you love, do the best you can do. Let's not, just phone it in. Let's actually make a difference in these
Yeah.
communities, and let's work with our families and try to set up the next generation as best we possibly can. You're going to be down in the beautiful U.S. Virgin Islands in October,
Yes.
Region 2 Head Start Conference. Tell folks what can they expect. You got a couple sessions, I believe you're doing. What can they expect to learn from you down in the Virgin Islands?
I would say the session that I was asked to consider doing at this conference, and I submitted, I didn't know if I was get it approved. But 2 years ago, I did a workshop on forgiveness and healing. And as I said earlier, it's a core piece of who I am today. But it's a session to help parents to reflect, to acknowledge, and then to develop things that we could use moving forward around our own parents' stories. In my work, 25 years of working with families, a lot of people have been impacted by their parents, positively and negatively. And this session is fun. It's not a heavy session. I mean, we do a lot of fun things to reflect, but the few times I've done it, Andy, the emails that I've received from people who are saying, I just never thought about it that way, or I'm glad I had a chance to talk about this for the first time. That's my goal, is to create a safe space for folks to have fun, to do some of this reflection, but also think about how they can do things maybe the same or different with their children. And so I'm excited. It's a happy space for me. And then there are door prizes that we do, some cash, but also we give away books as well, because I like for folks to leave with things in their hands.
Oh, I love it. Well, that's going to be fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, if you want to be a part, region2headstart.org, October 27th through the 31st, down in the beautiful U.S. Virgin Islands. You will see Mr. Patterson down there, as well as many, many other speakers. And I look forward to seeing everybody. That would be great. Well, I
Can't wait.
can't thank you enough for your time today and all the work that you've been doing. I really appreciated the conversation.
Thank
I
you.
actually learned a lot. So thank you for that. I'll give you the final word. Anything else you want to say to folks or anything else we missed?
I will end by this, because I always like to make sure I close this up. But my father and I, for 20 years, were separated. And I think my kids were born, we had an adult conversation. And in that conversation, my father said a couple words to me, and it changed my life. He said, "I'm sorry." And it shifted the anger. I can't explain it. Somebody else can. But it shifted what I had bottled up. And the end of that conversation was an embrace, because I also apologized to him. Because at that time, I wasn't the best son. I would see him in the streets, and I would cross the street sometimes. I was hurt. But we acknowledged both of our pains. I did tell him, and he knew all of my accomplishments. As much as I thought he didn't care, everything that I had accomplished, undergraduate, graduate, athletically, my dad knew all of the stuff. And so it reminded me about the power of connection. But my father, 10 years later, got really sick. And one of the things that I had a chance to do, as fortunate, was travel the last days of his life. My brother called me and asked, and you probably heard this before, Andy, but my doctor said to my mom, my dad was in hospice, said, "Your dad is about to die, but he's waiting on somebody."
Mm.
And I was the only person who wasn't in South Carolina. And so I received a phone call to, if you can, get home. I had been connected for a number of years at this point with my father, but got this phone call to come back. I had just seen him the month prior, but at this time they gave him 3 days. He had not eaten, drank, or spoken, eyes closed the entire time, and he was shutting down. 10-hour trip from Baltimore, took me to Charlotte, had to drive from Charlotte to Columbia. And Andy, I was in the room with my dad for 5 minutes. I was in the room for 5 minutes with my father. And this is some years after we had this reconciled conversation. We were captured in the state newspaper. People told out, they heard our story and they just, but it's personal to me. But 10 hours, I was there for 5 minutes. When I walked in, I grabbed my father's hand. His eyes closed for 3 days. No movement, no nothing. And when I grabbed his hand, he opened his eyes. And as I'm holding his hand, I said to him, I love you. And I remember like yesterday, it's still 5 minutes, one tear. And as I'm holding my father's hand, my dad expired in my hand.
Oh.
So when I tell you, it's never too late. So for anybody who's listening or watching this, if they have had this kind of fractured experience with a parent, we can talk fathers, but a parent, it's never too late. I'm better because of the experience that I had. So I don't need to read a teleprompter or to have a slide deck. I mean, this is personal joy for me. And I want people to experience this, but I talk about forgiveness and healing because I have been. I'm not healed, I'm healing, I'm better. But if I left your audience with anything, it is if there is a person who you are in discretion or in issue with, if there's a person you haven't spoken to because of some disagreement for whatever reason, could be your child, let them know you apologize. Even if you don't feel like you're the one, because time is fleeting. And you might think I'll talk to them on their birthday or I'll catch them at Christmas. None of it's guaranteed. So if you hear me, if you hear Andy, if we see you at the conference, I challenge you. When I was a kid, Andy, we played a game, it'd say double dog dare you.
Sure.
I double dog dare you to make that, and don't do it for them. Do it for yourself. So with that, Andy, I can't say thank you enough.
Oh man, you're gonna make me cry here, man. What a story. I really appreciate that. And man, you stole the show. Thank you.
No.
That's
No, this is your show. So
no way, man.
I'm just a lucky guest.
We're just a medium here to get information out, and I can't think of more great information than what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll hear some stories. Let us know. We want to hear if you've reached the double dog challenge, if you've completed it, right?
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
Well, Mr. Patterson, always a pleasure, my friend. I can't wait to see you in person, share a few fist bumps, maybe some hugs, and chat a little bit.
Hugs are fine.
But thank you so much for being here. Thank you for tuning in. We have a lot more great guests like Mr. Patterson coming up here on the Early Childhood Chats podcast. And for that, I guess we'll say thank you very much, and we will catch you on the next podcast.